Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to today's Artful Conversation. I'm Erin Monroe, the Kriebel Curator of American Art here at the Wadsworth Atheneum, and the curatorial point person for our new initiative, the Jewish Art and Culture Research Project, which has inspired today's Artful Conversation. This series is one of the many perks of membership at the Wadsworth Atheneum, and we opened up today's talk with two goals in mind, not only to raise awareness about this exciting new initiative, but also to offer a sense of the perks of membership for those who are not currently members. And for any of you who are new to the Wadsworth, we are the country's oldest continually operating art museum located in Hartford, Connecticut. Our collection of nearly 50,000 objects encompasses from antiquity to contemporary art, and our 5 connected buildings include a Gothic Revival castle and an international style interior. Some of you may have read the exciting news that just last week, the Washington Post's annual rankings of U.S. art museums came out, and we were listed as number 18, just above the Whitney Museum and the Dallas Museum of Art, which is excellent company to keep. Today's program is just one of the many ways we like to offer a deeper perspective on art and visual culture. Just as the museum cares for its collections in the physical sense, so too are we caring for the collection in an intellectual and an emotional sense. Programs like the Artful Conversations allow us to engage with the latest scholarship and present new and expansive views of history and visual culture. Before I introduce our speaker, Rachel Gerstein, I want to expressly thank the funders who have supported this initiative. They include the Zach's Family Foundation, the Cheryl Chase and Stuart Bear Foundation, the Goldfarb Family Fund, and an anonymous funder. In addition, I'd like to recognize Deborah Kass, the contemporary artist, who has been nothing but collegial in the course of planning this talk. Now for today's speaker, Rachel Gerstein. Rachel is a New York-based independent scholar who uniquely combines her art history training and Jewish background. She also blends a unique set of training, including, she blends a unique academic background, having trained at the Courtauld Institute of Art in London and obtaining an MBA with a concentration in nonprofit management from Columbia Business School. She has worked in both the nonprofit and private sectors of the art world, including the Yale Center for British Art, the Hillstead Museum in Farmington, Connecticut, and New York's Richard Feigen Gallery. Especially focused on bringing to light Jewish themes within art history, she currently serves as a consultant on special projects for Temple Emmanuel's Bernard Museum of Judaica in New York. For the past 15 months, Rachel has brought this expertise to help the Wadsworth interpret and contextualize objects through the lens of the Jewish experience. Today's array of artwork offers a glimpse into the hard work that Rachel has been doing as part of this project. She's a fantastic storyteller and an impeccable scholar, and you are in for a real treat. Please join me in welcoming Rachel.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that wonderful introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. It has indeed been a great honor to assist the Wadsworth's curatorial team with a project that has such personal meaning. It has been an opportunity to consider the intersection of two things that are very important to me: art museums and Judaism. Before turning to the primary object of study I'll discuss today, living artist Deborah Kass's painting, Single Red Yentl, I'd like to offer some preliminary context for the Jewish Art and Culture Research Project, which I've been leading for the museum. The Jewish Art and Culture Research Project centers on artworks and artists in the permanent collection seen through the lens of the Jewish experience. That is, considering Jews as a religious, ethnic, and cultural minority. It is, of course, one of the museum's several interpretation efforts intended to highlight underrepresented voices or lesser-known narratives across its holdings. Rather than focusing on Judaica, defined as ceremonial art used by Jews for religious purposes, we have set out to define Jewish art and visual culture more expansively and thus outside of a strictly religious domain. This definition also reflects the Wadsworth's range of objects relevant to the topic. But first, a word about the project's ironic timing. It was in October 2022 that Matthew Hargraves, the museum's director, Erin Monroe, the museum's curator of American art, and I began our discussion about considering the museum's collection through a Jewish perspective. And nearly a year later, when the project was merely a germ of an idea, funding for it materialized just a few weeks before the October 7th massacre in Israel and the surge in anti-Semitism in this country and across the world. The impetus for the project had occurred in September 2022, when an Instagram post by Matthew, a colleague of mine from many years before at the Yale Center for British Art, featured Camille Pizarro's striking painting of his eldest daughter, Minette. I had recently seen the painting owned by the Wadsworth, but on loan to the Jewish Museum in New York City, where it was included in an exhibition called Afterlives, Recovering the Lost Stories of Looted Art. Minette, made in 1872, has an unbelievable history, just one of the multi-layered stories of formerly Jewish-owned objects that survived World War II and have gone on to have afterlives in museums and private collections. You must be versed in the Holocaust story behind this work, I texted Matthew on September 22nd, 2022. No, he immediately wrote back. And unbelievably, he said, I was utterly unaware that Pizarro was Jewish and of the anti-Semitism he experienced. Please tell me more. These are stories we need to be telling. The current label says nothing about this. Indeed, the text of the Wadsworth's label for Minette, which Matthew shared with me, read as follows. Pizarro painted several portraits of his daughter Jean Rachel, nicknamed Minette. In this sympathetic portrayal, rendered with a striking realism, Pizarro shows her standing in the middle of a room, hands clasped and looking out at the viewer. The simple, natural pose and innocent gaze of the little girl capture her shy personality. Muted colors and soft illumination evoke the peace of her domestic environment. Tragically, Minette died in 1874 at the age of 9. And pictured here on the screen is the text of Minette's label at the Afterlives exhibition at the Jewish Museum, which read, "The painter's beloved young daughter Minette looks out at the viewer, hands gently folded. This intimate portrait has a complex and tragic history. Pizarro gave it to a friend with whom he and his family stayed during the birth of another daughter who died in infancy, as a token of gratitude and grief. A mere 2 years after the painting's completion, Minette also died at the age of 9. After her death, the painting was returned to Pizarro, for whom it served as a symbol of mourning for a second time. By the outbreak of World War II, this painting was in the collection of Bruno Stahl, whose father was president of the Jewish community of Berlin, assisting Jews who were attempting to leave the city during the Nazi regime. Stahl stored his paintings in a Jewish bank vault before leaving Germany for the United States. After the fall of France, the vault was looted and the painting was sent to the Jeu de Paume. Like Paul Cézanne's Bather and Rocks and Pablo Picasso's group of characters also on view in this exhibition, the work was loaded onto a train in 1944, bound for a Nazi warehouse. The train was found by Free French soldiers who took possession of the artworks on board. After the painting was recovered by Allied authorities, it was returned to Stahl. Of note, neither label, not even the one in the Jewish Museum exhibition, mentions the fact that Pizarro was Jewish. So, not only is a crucial aspect of the life of this painting that it was held in Nazi hands, captured in the Wadsworth's label, but also the Jewish identity of its maker, complicated as it was, is not explained at all. These are the very sorts of stories Matthew, Aaron, and I hoped I could research, bring out into the open, and share with the public via this project. Another component of this project has been getting to know the culture of the Wadsworth as an institution, both presently and in the past. After I had been well on my way researching Kass's single Red Yentl, Pizarro's Minette, and just beginning to do a third deep dive into the Wadsworth's holdings by the Jewish colonial silversmith Meyer Myers, one of my colleagues at the museum, who is also Jewish and has been a member of the Hartford community nearly her entire life, pointed out to me that, like Minette, the Wadsworth's Marc Chagall painting was accompanied by a label omitting any mention of Chagall's Jewish identity. This seemed a missed opportunity, given that Chagall is perhaps the most well-recognized Jewish artist. So, to kick off our project's presentation to the public, we hung an accompanying second label which squarely addresses this oversight and announced the change via the museum's Instagram account in October, specially timed to coincide with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. The following quote from Chagall himself, stated in 1933, captures the essence of our project. If a painter is a Jew and paints life, how is he to keep Jewish elements out of his work? But if he is a good painter, his painting will contain a great deal more. The Jewish content will be there, of course, but his art will aim at universal relevance. Speaking of universal relevance, in her recommendation to acquire living artist Deborah Kass's painting, Single Red Yentl, the museum's contemporary art curator at the time noted that this painting would fall squarely within the museum's stated collecting objectives because the painting celebrates art and art making, demonstrates relevance and publicness, especially in light of the rise of anti-Semitism and given the large concentration of Jewish neighbors and museum goers in nearby West Hartford, and showcases storytelling. Please get ready for some juicy ones. Having given you this background, I will now turn to the primary object of our study together today, Single Red Yentl, made in 1992 and recently acquired by the Wadsworth in 2022. Single Red Yentl is an imposing, impossible to miss, 6-foot-tall silkscreen painting by the New York City-based Deborah Kass, a living artist with whom I was able to speak and whose own discourse on her artistic production has been amply recorded. Given this unique vantage point of being able to hear the artist herself discuss her connection to Judaism as a fundamental aspect of her identity made manifest in her work, I have incorporated her voice frequently. Born in 1952, Kass visited the MoMA as a teenager, but did not encounter anything that could speak to her experience as a Jewish girl from Long Island. She describes her upbringing as follows. My parents were assimilating Jews, as everyone in their neighborhood and my age was. They were kids of immigrants, and their indoctrination into American culture was pop culture. It was movies in my mother's case, music in my father's. My mother was obsessed with Hollywood in the 1940s and knew everything about every star. Like all Jewish parents, they knew who was Jewish in Hollywood. My father was obsessed with jazz, the original American art. I grew up immersed in these major streams of pop culture, each with its own history, and each parent being utterly articulate about the history of the form, one in movies and one in jazz. Looking back, Kass has said that personal nostalgia for her middle-class Jewish upbringing provided the source of content in her art. Part of what is fascinating about her quote I just shared is that the Jewish actress Barbra Streisand, specifically in her cinematic role as Yentl, became a primary muse for Kass. And her father's passion for jazz music instilled in her the fundamental practice of great jazz artists who find new ways to interpret familiar songs, an idea that would become foundational to her artistic practice, theme, and variations. About 30 years ago, the Jewish Museum mounted a seminal exhibition about Jewish art curated by Norman Kleeblatt called Too Jewish? Challenging Traditional Identities. In the exhibition catalog, Kleeblatt draws our attention to the fact that the artists whose works he incorporated, including Kass, belonged to the first generation to have grown up watching their American and Jewish reflections on the television screen. And these artists had reaped the contentious rewards of assimilation and Americanization while nevertheless experiencing marginalization, alienation, and the subtle anti-Semitism that still permeates American culture. Kass pursued formal art instruction, including at Carnegie Mellon University, from which she received her BFA in painting, and which she chose precisely because Andy Warhol, the most famous pop artist of all time and one of her icons, had gone there. From the mid-70s to the mid-80s, she copied the works of male masters to learn their styles and to transform their language into her own. She sought to develop a unique style in her search for something she thought was missing in art history, herself and people like her. Then, in the late 80s and early 90s, just when gender studies and feminist literary criticism were emerging, primarily in the French and English departments of major colleges and universities, Kass conceived the idea of integrating her queer, female, Jewish identity into her art. When I interviewed her, she told me that she had been developing at that time a two-pronged obsession with understanding systems of oppression, the Holocaust and slavery, reading books by Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi, and Robert Lifton's Nazi Doctors, among others. And she found that while the field of literature was embracing multiculturalism, there was a gaping hole in art history. Art historical scholars like Judith Butler and Griselda Pollock were at the forefront of such efforts, but Kass spotted an opportunity for the exploration of her personal identity in painting. She explains that she was born 7 years after the liberation of the concentration camps, and that having grown up in a very Jewish Catholic neighborhood on Long Island, she was missing the Jewish piece of multiculturalism in art. In her own words, there was an obvious hole which happened to be my particular home, Jewishness. Kass felt that as multiculturalism and acceptance for different racial, sexual, and ethnic identities were coming about, the one other not being considered was being Jewish. So she did. Thus, by 1990, she had identified her subjects, images culled from art history and popular culture, high and low art, and her primary technique, appropriation. Pictured here on the screen, a major painting of that year, Subject Matters, combines Peanuts' Lucy on the left. This comic strip was a childhood fascination for Kass, and she even exchanged letters with the cartoonist Charles Schulz, its creator, when she was a young girl. The capital letter I in the middle for I, ego, Jasper Johns's eyeglasses on the upper right, and a pile of eyeglasses in the World War II Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz on the lower right. Kass's fascination with Andy Warhol began when she was about 13 and saw a reproduction of his painting Before and After of 1961 on the left, which depicts two cartoon-like faces of women in profile prior to and following a nose job. Kass says that Warhol's work was the first painting that cut close to the bone, literally and figuratively. It was the perfect jumping off point to talk about my own presence. Growing up in a suburban Jewish neighborhood, so many of her Jewish friends had gotten nose jobs, and her mother desperately wanted her to get one too. Kass has said that her own painting, made 3 decades later in 1991, Before and Happily Ever After on the right, led directly to her paintings of Barbra Streisand and her exclusive use of Warhol. In her version of this Warhol painting, Kass varies his depiction of a nose job ad by inserting a Disney drawing of Cinderella getting the glass slipper, hence her use of the phrase happily ever after in her title. In a hilarious and clever conceit, Kass waved her magic wand, turning Warhol's diptych of an ad for a nose job into a Jewish American princess's Cinderella dream come true. By appropriating Warhol's familiar painting language and format, Kass could say what she needed to say in a highly accessible way. It was from 1992 to 2000 that Kass most consciously appropriated the works of Andy Warhol to create a body of silkscreen paintings called the Warhol Project, in which she recast his iconic portrait subjects from the 1960s of dominant Gentile cultural icons like Jackie Kennedy, with her own personal heroes from her secular culture of growing up Jewish, like Barbra Streisand. Importantly, Kass borrowed an original creation and, in an almost Talmudic way, commenting on the commentary, turned it over and over again to make something new. For those who may not know, the Talmud is the central text of rabbinic debate and commentary, which interprets the Torah, also called the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, which is the foundation of all Jewish beliefs and practices. Within the Warhol project, Kass's first series, the Jewish Jackie series, the Barbaras, was followed by My Elvis, the Yentls, in which she painted single, double, triple, and quadruple versions of Barbara in black and white, or often with colorful gold, red, or blue backgrounds. The Wadsworth single Red Yentl is part of the My Elvis series, in which Kass borrowed Warhol's composition for his full-length portrait of Elvis Presley as a cowboy from the film Flaming Star, and instead depicts Barbra Streisand from the film Yentl of 1983, which she starred in, directed, co-wrote, and co-produced. Kass's remarkable humor shines through yet again, as Elvis's gun is replaced with Yentl's Talmud. Based on Isaac Bashevis Singer's 1950s short story, Yentl the Yeshiva Boy, the film cast Streisand in the role of the pious daughter of a rabbi in 19th century Poland, who disguises herself as a young man after her father's death to pursue her own intellectual passions as a Talmudic scholar. Kass's choice of Streisand was significant because she was the female performer who most publicly affirmed her Jewish identity. As you'll recall, having grown up with a mother who adored the movies, a young Kass had seen Streisand boldly come on the scene, and Kass wanted to do just that too. But coming from her background, Kass explains that to embrace Barbara was a nonconformist act. She goes on to say, in the early 1960s, Barbara first exploded on the Broadway scene and on television. I was an adolescent then. Her gorgeousness was not universally embraced, especially by first-generation Jews in suburbia, busy trying to assimilate, such as my parents. I thought she was positively divine. Her awkwardness, her nose, her difference thrilled me. That a Jewish girl with wit, talent, and brains could be herself and make it spoke volumes to me. As for Yentl, doesn't it speak for itself, or doesn't he speak for herself? Yentl dons male attire to study sacred texts, to realize her desire for knowledge forbidden to her by law. The image of a woman dressed as a man in order to study sacred texts denied to her by law and tradition. A woman whose love for the living history of learning, spirit, and ideas overwhelms propriety and social norms seemed to me to be the perfect metaphor for being a woman artist. Here, we see photographs of Deb Kass herself juxtaposed with Red Deb on the far right, a self-portrait she painted in 2000. Kass appropriated Warhol over and over in her career. Here, she has replaced Warhol's Liz Taylor with her own likeness. Finally, might Kass's use of red as a background color for the Wadsworth Yentl painting and Red Deb speak to red's symbolic resonance as a signifier of defiance? Beyond appropriation, Kass also uses other visual motifs to reflect on her Jewish experience. One of her trademarks is how she juxtaposes Yiddish expressions with contemporary culture and events. Her iconic Oy Yo sculpture on the left is easy to understand. Read one way, it's the Yiddish cry Oy. Read the other way, it's Yo, the omnipresent New York greeting for hello. Another example, though, which is more subtle, is her 2003 painting, It's Hard to Be a Jew, on the right. This painting juxtaposes the events of 9/11 with the Yiddish proverb, Schwer zu sein a Yid, which translates as, It's hard to be a Jew, in gigantic pink puffy letters. We can just make out vertical towers in the background. Kass explicitly explains this connection in an October 26, 2022 opinion piece, ironically published nearly a year to the date before October 7, 2023. A reproduction of this painting appears in the article. Kass writes, America was our promised land. For any American Jew alive now, America saved your family 1, 2, or 3 generations ago. 3 of my 4 grandparents fled Ukraine, then Russia and Belarus, sites of famous pogroms. My great-grandparents from my mother's side fled Hungary. My father's parents had accents so thick I could barely understand them. Ancestors killed somewhere in Eastern Europe. My parents didn't know them, and my grandparents didn't speak of them. If the Cossacks didn't get them, the Nazis did. It was the same for every Jewish kid I grew up with in our insulated New York suburb. In the big cities, being somewhat white, if still different, we have flourished here for 3 or 4 generations, especially those of us lucky enough to grow up in post-war America. Our fathers fought in the wars, then went to college on the GI Bill, and a huge middle class was born. Jewish excellence in business, the arts, and sciences exploded. We were safe here. And yet when I was a child, my reoccurring nightmare was of armed Russians or Nazis knocking on our suburban front door to take us all away. At 10 a.m. on September 11th, 2001, in Tribeca on West Broadway, where I lived for 25 years, I told my partner, Patty, to pack a bag in case we had to flee. When a friend asked, How did you know to do that? I said, I have been waiting for this my whole life. When to leave? That's the question every Jew has embedded in our DNA. When did people know to leave Germany? Russia? Where do you go? What do you take? What do you leave behind? How will you live, if you live? They say anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred, but it is hard to know who is historically more hated, Jews, women, or homosexuals. I have those 3 giant targets on my back. The Wadsworth single Red Yentl painting speaks powerfully from Deborah Kass's unique vantage point on Judaism as a queer woman. And it is possible that her position sitting at the intersection of 3 persecuted groups may actually have helped her elevate her Jewish voice. In modern Jewish life, there is a whole range of religious practice, from Reform to conservative to Orthodox. Kass's Jewish experience is, of course, likely very different from that of, for example, a straight Orthodox man. But as Jews, we must all find a way, no matter our level of religious observance, to reckon with the painful history of our people, from the early biblical experiences of being slaves in Egypt, to the destruction of 2 holy temples in Jerusalem, to confinement in ghettos, to expulsions in the Spanish Inquisition, to the organized massacres of Jews in Russia and Eastern Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, known as pogroms, to the horrors of the Holocaust, to the subtle and not so subtle anti-Semitism we regularly encounter today. Many of us, as Kass suggests, may always be ready to pack a bag, while others may focus their attention on a long-standing determination to exist and persist against all odds. As I have sat with this painting for many months and considered my own Jewish experience too, I have thought quite a lot about how we cannot possibly collapse or flatten all Jewish experience into one experience. If we did that, we would lose the richness of what this project can teach us. Even if this painting may express Jewishness in a way that doesn't feel like Jewishness to all of us, I myself, a student of the old master artists, not the contemporary ones, have come to see the great value in Kass's message. And I feel we owe her a huge debt of gratitude for placing Jewishness front and center. We cannot possibly behold single Red Yentl without thinking about what it means to be Jewish in the world. In September, right before the Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, Kass designed a billboard for the autumnal Jewish high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The billboard was displayed in Columbus, Ohio, with the Hebrew phrase Tikkun Olam next to its English translation, Heal the World, in white, green, and yellow paint against a blue background. During my interview with Kass on October 19th, 2023, she drew my attention to a reposting on Instagram of this recent billboard installation to mark the October 7th massacre. The billboard is one of 12 artworks in 7 states in Washington, D.C., created for a project called The Highest Form of Wisdom is Kindness, which takes its name from a phrase attributed to the Talmud and is aimed at fighting rising anti-Semitism in the United States. Kass said of the reposting of her work following October 7th, "I've avoided the Israel-Palestine conflict my whole life. I've never gone to Israel. I know that with this billboard, I didn't solve anti-Semitism, but I know a pogrom when I see it. I'm not coming up with a new artwork in this moment because I'm completely freaked out that I'm going to say the wrong thing." Our project has raised several consistent questions, themes, and dichotomies. How to highlight that being Jewish is not just a religion, but also a cultural identity. How and whether to address the spectrum of religious practice, from Reform to Orthodox. How to consider Ashkenazi versus Sephardi traditions, 2 branches of Judaism originating in different parts of the world. How to think about Israel versus the diaspora experience and assimilation. How to highlight that the Jews are indeed a minority here in America, despite the fact that following large waves of immigration from Russia and Eastern Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries, this formerly reviled and often physically threatened minority, posited as a racial other, emerged as a highly visible and empowered group. All of this and more is what we bear in mind as we turn our attention to the Wadsworth's collection. And how might these artists' experiences of the past help us address present concerns? The end product of our project is still not yet defined. In addition to amended labels and this artful conversation, might we present a small exhibition, a themed audio guide, a series of artful conversations, Pizarro next? But we are clear that we have set out with the stated goals of enabling museum visitors to engage with art as a means for a greater understanding of what it means to be in the Jewish minority, and contributing to ever-emerging scholarly discussions in the museum world about the Jewish experience. Along these lines, part of my research has also been reaching out to colleagues at museums across the country for collaboration and support. And as I have done this, it seems that the Wadsworth project stands out. Perhaps our project can inspire other encyclopedic art museums to examine their collections through the lens of the Jewish experience. Looking to the future, I will continue to research artists and objects from across the museum, such as Moses Ezekiel's bust of Franz Liszt, holdings from the Costume and Textiles Department, Alex Katz's paintings, and objects by the Jewish colonial silversmith, Meyer Myers. And another idea we have had is to explore works in the collection with overtly anti-Semitic imagery, such as Johann Zoffany's French Revolution plundering the King's Cellar at Paris of 1794. I draw your attention to this detail in the lower right, which I've enlarged to shed light on Zoffany's depiction of a Jewish peddler with disturbing typecast physical characteristics, such as a big hooked nose and red hair. He holds out money, drawing on the Jewish stereotypical qualities of greediness and miserliness. While this Jewish art and culture research project cannot possibly be the clarion call that will solve political conflicts of the day or dislodge deep-seated ancient hate, perhaps by educating and informing through art, it can ultimately clarify and deepen understanding of difference. May this project, at a time when minority voices are rightfully being integrated into the art historical narrative, contribute to the nascent efforts to also move Jewish artistic experience from the ghetto into the spotlight. Thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you, Rachel. That was, as expected, very powerful, very sobering, and deeply engaging. I really appreciate all that I've learned working with you so far. And as Rachel alluded to, there is more to come. The project has obtained a little bit of funding to get us to this point. But if you were inspired today and have any interest in learning more about the project or even supporting us, I will put my name and email in the chat. Also that of my colleague, Sharman Mahmoud Price, our head of institutional advancement. I will open it up for questions and comments. And before I do that, I do want to acknowledge the donor of the painting, Alice Cosman, and her late husband, Marvin Cosman, for whom we are eternally grateful to have this work here. So if there are any questions, please add them in the chat. I will moderate them accordingly. I will kick it off and Rachel, just ask you, what reactions did you have when you came upon the Deborah Kass picture? It really does foreground Jewish identity front and center, but I'm just curious genuinely, because you were not aware of her work that much prior to this.
I was so pleased to see at a museum like the Wadsworth a painting that had Yentl in it and that was so big and red. I hope that people, Erin was telling me yesterday that it's just been put back on display, and I hope people will get to come and see it in the flesh, because being with it is so powerful. So I think that's what I would say, that just her conceit to put Barbara Streisand as Yentl front and center. I had never seen anything like that, never encountered anything like that before.
It's great. That's good art that stops you in your tracks. Or provocative art. There is one question that came in and that I can answer because it's an artist that's actually in my collection. But have we considered Raphael Sawyer, a 20th century modernist painter? And yes, among the looking ahead objects that Rachel showed on screen, there is a much larger and wide-ranging list that we are considering. And another takeaway, if you can recall, there was a mention of additional labeling for select artworks. We are also improving our own collections database records, wherein the keyword Jewish could be added to a record. So then someone searching for artists, but maybe not knowing the name, can get at results that way. So Sawyer is among many certainly modernist painters that we can think of. Everyone like from Sol LeWitt to Lee Krasner. I mean, we have some great contenders here. A question is, will this talk be available on the docent portal for our Wadsworth docents? And I believe we can have that happen. Certainly, we're appreciative of the way the docents are also receiving queries from the public and our visitor services team, who have had guests come in asking, do you have any Jewish art? And that's also a very subjective topic. Is it Judaica? Is it someone like Marc Chagall? So we're also fielding what it means, sort of visitor expectations with a project like this. Here we have, yes, the talk will be on our YouTube channel. And we have, one of our docents saying, a docent who happens to be Jewish and regularly tours explicitly Christian art. This initiative is very welcome. So that is very good feedback. We also acknowledge that there are other faiths and cultures represented in our collection, and there's great potential for a kind of multi-faith tour, if that's something of interest. We are about to open an exhibition highlighting some of our Islamic art in a show called Divine Geometry. So lots of initiatives going on. Someone also offers, looking ahead, I find Modigliani to be a fascinating figure within this realm. Thank you for that. What other questions, comments? I can read them anonymously. We really are meant to be just an open space to hear your thoughts. Here's one. Did Kass have any intersections with literary figures, particularly Roth, who had his own perceptions of life as an assimilated Jew in the 1940s and beyond? Do you know, Rachel?
I don't know. I know, as I said, that she was very interested in what was going on in the late 90s in English and French literary departments, but I as far as just exploring multiculturalism, and then also specifically, I mentioned Primo Levi, Elie Wiesel, Lifton's Nazi Doctor. So there were definitely Jewish authors and writings she was turning to, but I don't know specifically that author. Yep. We could get back, or the person could correspond with us, and we can try to find that out.
Absolutely. Deborah Kass responded.
Oh, there we go. I was actually hoping that might happen.
Hi and welcome. She says, only in terms of reading everything through the years, in terms of a specific Roth influence, imagining Philip Roth, right? The author. Mm-hmm. Question, are there plans to make any new acquisitions in conjunction with this initiative? Well, it certainly has come up. We don't have anything clearly itemized at the moment, but it is absolutely relevant to the ways in which we can consider the collections we have and what we don't have. Some of what we've already discovered is there are works within our collection within the building and storage that are relevant to the topic. So I think we do need to kind of assess what is here and consider, yeah, what would be meaningful to have added to the collection. Question, are you thinking of having an exhibition similar to the one you just mentioned on Islamic art? It's absolutely a possibility. Rachel's with us through March of next year, so it would be really interesting if we could extend her time and then explore those possibilities further, which would require a little more planning. And a question, was Single Red Yentl acquired as a work of art by a Jewish artist? Well, I think that was absolutely relevant to its proposal, but I was not immediately involved in that acquisition, so I don't know. It's a good, very good question. Another comment, love the idea of an interfaith tour that the docents could lead. Thank you. Good to know. Good feedback. And I'm just checking all the other channels. Okay. It's so interesting that Deborah Kass is here. Thank you so much for joining. Any other comments, queries, feedback? Oh, thank you, Eric, for adding. There will be an interfaith film series here in March, so please look for that. Denise, the head of our docent corps, says, thank you. I've got a lot of follow-up work to do. Thank you for the talk. And yes, I should say, if you are in the area or have an opportunity to come to the Wadsworth, the Deborah Kass painting is on view right now, as is our Marc Chagall picture and Camille Pizarro work. So we're delighted to have those works on view, and one could conceivably see them all in a short period of time and then spend more time here looking at the rest of the collection. Yeah, I think we're at a little bit of a lull. Any other? Rachel's here. We've got thank you, looking forward to more. Oh, let me put the contact information in the chat for you have my email, the research at the Wadsworth email that Rachel's using, and then any contributions or interest in helping support the project, the email for Sharman Price. So I'm going to put those here. Lots of thank you and appreciation. I learned so much. I look forward to the next one, as do we. Is the Minette picture on view or the Pizarro that is usually up? Both. We have a Pizarro landscape and the Minette picture. They are both on view right now in the Morgan building. Okay, in the chat now are 3 email addresses, and again, mine for any curatorial queries or follow-up, Sharman Price for interested in membership or supporting this initiative, and then Rachel is research@thewadsworth.org. Oh, Deb Kass, that's such a touching message. You made her cry. So thank you for that. This was absolutely wonderful. And to the scholars and colleagues that Rachel's been meeting, thank you so much for your support of this project. And we really do look forward to what lies ahead. So thank you, everyone. We will sign off for now. Rachel, you're getting lots of thank yous and appreciation, heart emojis. Really, really fantastic. So, okay, everyone. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.